creative journey. It's easy to get lost, but don't worry, you'll lift off. Sometimes you just need a creative pep talk.
Hey, you're listening to the Creative Pep Talk podcast. I'm your host, Andy J. Pizza. Most creators that I know, and myself included most of the time, don't have a sense of what we want our creative practice to look like. We don't know what we want, what we're after, but maybe you are different. Maybe you have figured out, you have an idea of, at least for now, what you're trying to go after. But the only problem is you don't actually have any idea how to get there. The thing you're after, well, the competition is probably extremely fierce. Thousands, if not more than thousands, might be after the exact same thing. And not to mention that the walls of this market are sky high and they're protected by gatekeepers and established practitioners of that craft that are interested in throwing you off the trail, keeping you out, and keeping their creative arena free of competition and keeping their place at the top of that creative food chain. So whether it's Spotify playlist that you're trying to get into, or the publishing world, or Hollywood maybe even, how in the world can you break through this impenetrable fortress, and how do you get them to give you a chance? You don't. You just give up. No, you give yourself a chance, or as many chances as it takes. And in this episode, we're going to talk about how to do just that. But before we do, just a quick word from our beautiful, lovely sponsors. This episode is supported by Wireframe, an original podcast from Adobe. The show is for small business owners who handle all the branding, content, and design all on their own. That might sound familiar to you if you're in those shoes. Each episode features one small business owner. They pair them with a mentor and someone who has had success in their own brand, and then also a designer to help them execute a plan to solve their problem. In the middle of this episode, I'm going to share an episode with you that caught my attention. Until we do get to that part of the podcast, you can search for Wireframe in your podcast player, wherever you listen to shows. And I'll also include a link to the show in my show notes. Thank you, Wireframe, for all your support. This is episode 2 of our Creative Pathfinder series, a 3-part series about how to find what to make today to unlock the kind of opportunities that you will be perfect for tomorrow. Essentially, what personal work can you make right now before anybody asks you to that will help you get the professional work that you're after later? This series is designed to help you find your creative path, aka help you make some of the most difficult choices that face a creator, like what should I make, what path should I take next, and how do I actually get there? This series is a new adaptation of our Creative Career Path framework. You can get a free copy of the Creative Career Path e-handbook by signing up to our newsletter at creativepeptalk.com/path, P-A-T-H. Not path, just creativepeptalk.com/path. I was saying that's how you spell path in case I'm saying it weird. The 3 episodes in this series are like the 3 acts in a story. Last episode, the first in the series, Act 1, was the creative call to adventure, aka defining what you want. This is the goal setting section of this process. Act 2, that's this episode, the creative journey, also known as living your creative montage by building your personal project. This is where you do the work. This is where you're Rocky training, but instead of punching the punching bag, you're punching the Wacom tablet or punching those keyboard keys, whatever it is. You're making the project that helps you move towards what you're after. This is the making section of your path. Act 3, the next episode, is going to be slaying your creative dragon, aka going for the work you want head on, armed with your creative project. This is the marketing. This is the story of the marketing section of your creative journey. Ready? Let's do it. Chapter 1, inspiring problems rarely equal inspired creative work. Let me explain what I mean by that. If you are ever finding yourself in downtown Columbus, Ohio, and you need a new pair of specs, go to specs. That's lingo for glasses. Go check out the Warby Parker store in downtown Columbus, Ohio. No, this isn't sponsored by Warby Parker. It's not more sponsored content. This is me telling you about one of the illustration projects that I did that I'm really most proud of. At the time of this recording, the Warby Parker store in downtown Columbus, Ohio has a giant mural, 4 large canvases, immersive wall decals, and something like 6 to 8 street-facing art panels, all created by me. I made them. I'm extremely proud of them. And when the shop first opened, we even designed 6 limited edition enamel pens, and I just loved them. They were really small, and they're cherished possessions from my creative journey. And I'm very, very happy with how this creative project turned out. I couldn't be happier with the result. However, I have to admit that I would not say that the execution of this work is the most creative that I've ever been. Now, don't get me wrong. The art direction for Warby Parker, art director that worked on this project, is a fantastic art director, Matt Singer, off the charts. I just love his taste and his vision for these stores. His vision for how to apply my work was very inspired and extremely creative. But my actual work, I would not call that my most creative moment. And yet, it's one of the things I'm most proud of making. What's going on there? I'm not being self-deprecating. I'm also not knocking the work. I'm just saying that this was such an inspiring problem to solve. It didn't actually take much creativity to tackle it at all. The art direction was set up so masterfully. I creatively barely knocked over one domino, and the mural just kind of appeared like an image hidden in dominoes, like those videos that your grandma sends you from Facebook that you watch while you're in the bathroom. Now, set aside that feeling that maybe your grandma is trying to tell you that your art sucks and domino art is what's truly inspiring for just a moment. And instead, hear what I'm trying to say. Inspiring problems rarely lead to the most inspired creative work that you'll ever do. It's so easy to tackle an inspiring problem, but an uninspiring problem, that's where you really have to get creative.
Come on, guys, let's get creative.
If that Warby Parker work isn't my most inspired work, why am I still so proud of it? Because that work was inspired by some of my most inspiring work. I didn't do that work that was kind of the creative essence of that Warby Parker store for Warby Parker first. That whole store was inspired by a piece that I had made for myself for this podcast. It looks like kind of like a starry night, and there's a ton of characters in there, and there's lettering that reads "Reach for the Stars," and I love that piece of work that inspired the work that we did for Warby Parker. But nobody asked me to make that piece that I loved so much. Nobody said they wanted it. It was the product of an uninspiring situation, an uninspiring problem of nobody wanting me to do anything at all, but me doing it anyway, believing that it was worth doing anyway, and having to come up with my own creative brief. That was difficult in its own right. That was a creatively challenging problem in its own right. It was my own problem that I had cooked up. And for my own enjoyment and knowing that it was likely not going to lead to anything at all. But for that piece of art to exist, it took years of creativity to make that situation what it was. Naming this show, coming up with the content for years, listening and translating philosophical ideas to the philosophy series that I was working on at the time that I made that artwork for. Like 15 digital techniques were coming together into that piece. There were style flourishes that had been kind of working that finally clicked in that piece of work. I was channeling old influences from the 50s and then some from the early 2000s from my college years and trying to make them feel fresh and feel like they were my own. And I even had this idea for that piece of work that I did on my own that inspired this Warby Parker job. I even had the idea to tackle what felt like the most frustrating, uninspiring prompt that I could think of. I was pretending like this image was me trying to make a good version of those mega blockbuster movie posters that you see, the Marvel DC ones where there's like 800 characters on them and they're all different sizes. And, it's just compared to like the movie posters of the 50s that were like Saul Bass and Paul Rand and like slick kind of graphic stuff. Like now they're just these huge chaotic messes. And I thought, wonder if I could take that uninspiring problem and make some inspired work. Could I make something really gorgeous, really beautiful, really fun and interesting that looks great? That's like if I was forced to do a movie poster that featured 15 characters. And so the problem couldn't have been more difficult. The problem I was trying to solve couldn't have been less inspiring. And therefore it required extreme amounts of creativity. And therefore, it resulted in what feels like to me as some of my most inspired work to date. Now, you may not agree, but the art director at Warby Parker did, and that piece got me the job that inspired the whole project. This project is not an outlier or an exception for me. I would say that this is the rule. Nearly all of the most inspired work that I've ever done was on the back of a difficult or uninspiring problem. And most often, the most uninspiring thing is that nobody was asking me to do it. Nobody said that they wanted me to make this work. Very uninspiring. And I had no idea whether this work was going to be good or whether it was going to lead to anything else. That is a very uninspiring situation to be in. Some of my biggest style breakthroughs, however, came from the freedom of experimenting in flyers for like local companies back in the day when I was living in the small town in Indiana, or creating for illustration jobs that I made up myself just to get around the fact that nobody was giving me illustration jobs. Those moments when you have a day job facing uninspiring problems, working in-house, like when you have to face those uninspiring problems in that empty inbox, that's when you have the opportunity of making your most inspired creative work, because it takes a ton of creativity to get inspired in those situations. What illustrator wouldn't kill for $100,000 budget and 10-floor Nike store to deck out in your art with 50-person team to help you paint it and situate it and make it look amazing? Like, what an inspiring problem that would be. But that doesn't actually require that much creativity to execute at that time. The creative result, it might be amazing if and when that opportunity comes around and you're ready for it and armed with it with years of inspired creative work in your back pocket. All of that is going to be on the back of this uninspiring notion of no one knocking at your door, but you showing up to the drawing board and making your most inspired work to date for yourself. Your local client doesn't care if you're creatively inspired or on the cutting edge. Your grandma doesn't care if your work is next level or anything up to snuff with domino art. The only person that cares about that right now, and as daunting and uninspiring as it may seem, is you. And that's the exact situation that has led to some of the world's biggest, most incredible, most inspired creative breakthroughs in human history. And so, if that's where you find yourself, there's no better place to start.